Councillors, the cameras are rolling and there's no one here.
I'm here.
We're here.
I'm here.
We're here with enthusiasm.
She said in a monotone voice.
And I care. And I care.
What? Did you want this?
Yes.
Cement flows.
Yes.
$5.
$30.
$5.
Okay, welcome,
No.
welcome Chris and Simon and Paul.
Let me read it first.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning. I've just got a brief presentation we'd like to run through. I guess probably in opening, it's worth saying that you know, we've had once again some fantastic events across the city over the first 9 months. But part of the thing we do want to highlight, which we mentioned at when we did our half-year report, it's been quite a challenging year for us financially, and what we talked about in December, as a result of the December report, has continued into the third quarter and will continue for the last quarter of this year. And we are facing the challenge of reduced revenue, which we've managed to sort of control by some reduction in costs, but not an amount of cost reduction that meets the reduction in revenue. So just in terms of the highlights, clearly at the moment we're still in the process of integrating the Maritime Museum into RFA. We've got the international visitor charge introduced at the Auckland Art Gallery, which we commenced in January this year. The stadium concert season, the ones that we had were tremendously successful. We didn't achieve as many as we thought we would for the year. Bug Lab at Auckland Zoo has worked well for us. We put that in place to try and find another revenue source while the zoo was going through a fairly major capital project upgrade. And we've clearly got the two significant capital projects. One is the zoo, as I mentioned, and secondly the Aotea Centre refurbishment, which is underway and will be going for the next 12 months. So just to touch on our operational performance, and Simon will talk a bit further about that. So at the end of March, we were 3.4 million unfavourable to budget, and we are forecasting that by the end of this year we'll be just under $5 million unfavourable to budget. So our revenue for the year is down about 7.7 million, which is about an 8% reduction on our total revenue. We've offset this by keeping our expenditure down by about 4.3 million. But we haven't actually been able to reduce the amount of expenditure to match as I said, the amount of revenue that we're actually decreased for the year. I think again it's just worth pointing out that, you know, we are in a pretty volatile commercial market in terms of what we operate, and I think, as we've mentioned before, when we start each year, we only have a certain amount of our commercial revenue locked in. The main challenge this year has been, I guess, in three areas. One, across the stadiums business with our concerts. We factored in sort of 12 concerts for the year, and we didn't achieve that number, and that's had quite an impact on our budget. The zoo has also suffered, I think, one from the number of wet days that we've had, and I know we talk regularly about those, but we've had a lot of wet weekends, which has a significant impact when we go from sort of 3,500 to 4,000 people a day to perhaps 300 or 400 people, and that's a significant drop in revenue for us. And the gallery, I think, which the council is well aware of, is the fact that we've struggled with funding for the gallery, and there's been a stronger deficiency this year. And I suppose if I reflect in terms of where we are for the year when we started the beginning of the 17-18 year, we knew we had a budget deficiency. That was obviously compounded by an additional cut that we got. And we had to put in place a 21% revenue increase across the business, which we thought if everything went well we would achieve. Things haven't gone as well as we had hoped, and so we're at the point we are at present. We're putting a few initiatives in place to try and address these. We're currently looking at how we can redesign our business model. What's the opportunity to sort of bring more of the business together? You know, we've got a group, we've got three businesses across Maritime, the gallery and the zoo, which are involved in cultural and conservation activities. We've got stadiums, live and conventions, which are involved in events. So we're just working through to see what constants that we've got across those businesses so that we can look as to how we can bring them better to get more efficient and start to deliver some better financial outcomes. We've got a staff freeze on at the moment. We've tried to keep our staff to a minimum over this period. We're about $2.5 million savings on staff costs, but we've got a freeze on at the moment to make sure that we can control our costs as well as we possibly can for the balance of this year and obviously into the future. And one of the things that we have already done is that we've actually merged Auckland Conventions under the one management with Auckland Live, and we started to see some initial benefits of those two organisations together. We also see some further opportunities from a shared services perspective, and we are working closely with Council, particularly around the ICT aspects, to see what additional benefits and savings that we can bring into the organisation. I guess some key observations, and some of them I've already mentioned. The fact is that we have a significant amount of fixed costs within RFA around our venues and those sorts of things, and we don't have a lot of discretionary spend in terms of what we do. We are faced with the challenge of coming into the coming years with the loss of the VEC for America's Cup, and even though we will be compensated for that, it's actually taken away sort of growth opportunities that could come with having the VEC in place. So we're looking at alternatives in terms of what other venues we can use and how we can continue to grow the convention business as part of that. We are in a pretty volatile market, as I've mentioned. This next year, again, will be challenging for us. The program is still got a lot of commercial revenue to be put in place. So we are facing, I think, another reasonably challenging year, but we probably enter this year with a little bit more confidence than we did with the current year that we're in. The capital works that we've got will have an impact on us, and I suppose one of the things that we have done is perhaps underestimated the amount of impact those capital works will have at the zoo and at the Aotea Centre in terms of the revenue that we would normally extract out of those two areas. So again, we're just looking at what the options are to try and maximise that. It's worth noting, I think, that the Aotea Centre will be closed from October through to the end of February while we do the internal refurbishment, and we're hopeful, of course, that once that's completed, that'll be an opportunity to sort of lift our revenues that we use from that facility. The zoo, of course, will be in construction for the next couple of years, but probably after 12 months we'll start to see some significant outcomes from that, and I guess this first 12 months will probably be the most challenging for the zoo, and we're expecting that we'll have sort of less patronage through there than we've previously had. I might pass to Simon now just to run through some of the financial position for the RFA and each of the business units.
Okay, thanks Chris. Morning councillors. The overall financial position for RFA per the slide shows the forecast for the year. Us as a business, we don't actually get a good handle in terms of where our forecast is until about January. January, which gives us about 4 or 5 months to put measures in place to correct. Part of that's just due to being able to secure and sign contracts around concerts and so forth. The numbers that you see in front of you, revenue is our external commercial revenue. Expenditure is our overall costs. The net position is largely council funding. So you'll see it as a negative, which reflects council's top-up in terms of the subsidy council provides us. For this year, as indicated at the half-year report, we were looking at a budget deficit. We've got a good handle in terms of where that's going to be this year. You'll see from the slide that 12.6 million forecast below budget external revenue. We're able to peg back around $7.7 million worth of costs. The majority of that, a fair amount of that, is actually in staff costs, which is it's useful to point out at this point in time that staff costs for us are your indirect staff costs. We have a lot of cost of sales, which gets included in the overall staff costs. So you may have an analysis around the group position. We are not $2 million overspent in staff costs. We're actually about $2 million underspent. Okay, so and this is something we'll continue to work with Council Finance just to get the definitions in the right spot for next period. So as I'd mentioned, it's $4.9 million forecasted as a deficit by the end of the year.
Flick back there.
So if I can go through each of our business units. The Auckland Art Gallery, the slides that you see up here don't have the property costs included in there. We are going through a process of reallocating all those costs out to provide a more accurate picture in terms of the investment that we put in and council puts into each of our facilities and businesses. In terms of revenue, the Art Gallery has been challenged this year, primarily around corporate sponsorship. We are seeing a decline in that space, as well as being able to secure paid exhibitions. Also, it's useful to point out that the international visitor charge, we budgeted on it being in place by September, but it needed to be worked through a lot more than we'd originally envisaged, so it came in January. It started off quite well for the first 2 to 3 months. It was hitting budget, but we are seeing a real decline over the last few months, last few weeks, and we see that continuing through the winter period.
Slow visitor numbers.
And again, we've got $2 million sought through the LTP just to right-size the gallery's funding to put it on a more sustainable basis. Auckland Conventions. So Auckland Conventions is one of our business units we expect a surplus from to subsidise the other parts of our organisation. It's had a relatively challenging year. One of the areas is that we've made a decision to go from an exclusive catering arrangement, which business economics-wise it made sense, but business-wise it caused a few challenges. So we've now gone to a panel. So our customers have a selection of caterers, but what that has meant is that under one supplier, they pay you an exclusivity premium and generally a higher percentage of commission in terms of sales. We've gone to a different model. We think we can grow the top line, but it will take time to actually grow. Auckland Conventions, the cost base is relatively low as it is. And with the merger with Auckland Live, we see real synergies to grow revenue as well as reduce costs. And it's worth pointing out that we are keeping the, at this stage, keeping the Auckland Conventions brand. It's still just managed under Auckland Live. Auckland Live is our theatre business. The key points with Auckland Live is up to about end of March, Auckland Live are forecasting a surplus to budget of $700,000. And just an example in terms of the volatility of our business, in April we lost a Rocky Horror Picture Show. It was cancelled because of an issue with the main actor. And Chicago, we haven't lost the revenue, but it was delayed till next year. And that has a direct impact on our bottom line. And they've done well to balance to budget, but they were looking at a surplus up until about 2 months ago. What I've got up there is in terms of lower attendance. In terms of, we receive revenue for these events through a venue hire as well as a percentage of all the food and beverage sales. So when you have less customers come through, you have less food and beverage sold, our commission goes down. So that there is a real impact as a result of lower attendances. Auckland Stadiums. Auckland Stadium is worth pointing out that Auckland Stadium is probably our smallest business unit. It has around 25 staff, so it's highly dependent on revenue to cover all their costs. The costs up here include occupancy, repairs and maintenance, and property costs. Hence the difference between last year and this year. Auckland Stadium is forecasting a $1.1 million deficit against budget. The main reasons are three major concerts that didn't proceed, one being Eminem. Paul McCartney, we contracted 2 concerts, but because of the sales of the first concert, they didn't execute their right to put on the second concert. And Katy Perry ended up going to an indoor venue rather than outdoor. Those 3 concerts had a major impact on the bottom line for Auckland Stadiums. We also have progressed relatively well, but it didn't come to fruition this year, which is the Mount Smart naming rights. And we've, in terms of diversifying our income, to put on concerts and so forth, we have temporary infrastructure that we have to put in for a concert. So when they're not in use, we do hire them out. So this year we hired out our turf protection to the Dunedin Stadium. Yeah, so it's just another opportunity to increase our return on investment in terms of these infrastructure. And as I mentioned before, lower attendance numbers for Auckland City Limits and Paul McCartney has a direct impact on what we receive out of commissions for food and beverage, merchandise and so forth. So there's a flow-on effect. Auckland Zoos had quite a tough year this year. We budget the attendance numbers based on a 20-year history. Okay, so we budget with a degree of confidence that we can achieve those visitation numbers. But it's useful to point out that we budgeted 37 rain days on peak days. If we, for each rain-affected day, in addition to what we budgeted for, it's around $50,000 net bottom line. So 37 days for the year budgeted, we had 55 by the end of March.
That was at peak times?
At peak times. So that's schools.
Every weekend for months, isn't it?
Weekends, school holidays. And also the zoo closed for a day or 2 earlier this year because of that storm. Okay, and that has a direct impact on our bottom line. As Chris had mentioned, the impact of the capital development was actually more significant than we had envisaged. So that did impact our visitation as well.
Corporate services.
Corporate services. Corporate services includes our property costs as well. Our facilities managers, our maintenance team, our finance team, procurement, ICT. So it's got quite a large mandate across the business. We put those together to seek synergies across the business to reduce costs. But we are allocating those out to the business units to provide a much clearer idea in terms of our investment in terms of each of our business units. Within corporate services, we just to remind Council that we are the largest users of shared services. So where we can, we look at relying more and more and leveraging off what Council has. But some of the services, given the unique nature of our business, just makes sense that we continue to do that in-house. Sorry about this.
Last one.
It's not.
Move it around a bit.
Maybe I'm pointing in the wrong area. Okay. Oh, it's gone too far. So our capital program, $65 million planned this year. That's our largest capital program since the existence of RFA. We were asked to see if we can find about $12 million deferrals from this year, which brings our capital program down to $53 million. We're forecasting that we will deliver about 80% of the revised program for this year. The largest project this year is the shared services building for the ATS Centre and the Town Hall. That's due for completion in July. And we've embarked on two of the largest projects being the ATS refurb, which is around 40 million.
40?
40 million.
40, right?
40. But that spans 2 financial years, and the majority of it will be in the next financial year. And Southeast Asia is a $50 million project, which started earlier this year, and it's for 3 years. So those are contracted, and we've got our contract partners, our designers, our project managers on board to deliver this project. Right, I'm happy to take
Chairman, we're happy to take questions somewhere.
Chris, there seems to be just a continual pattern of sort of not reaching revenue targets, you know, several years now. So are we just being too optimistic with our budgeting, especially on the revenue side? I mean, and, you know, I mean, we do have climate change now really with us. I think most of us around here are believing in it, and we're just getting more and more unpredictable weather. But it seems as though we're undershooting revenue budgets on a regular basis.
I think in the last couple of years we've pushed our revenue targets probably a little higher than we should. First of all, to try and reach a balanced budget. We are reaching the point now where perhaps we've got some of our venues operating at full capacity, and we continue with this, I guess, juggle of making sure that we still make the venues available for community activities as well. And so we've, you know, it's a balance, and we don't sort of set any set numbers around whether it's 60-40, 70-30, anything like that. But we do try and, I guess, we will take advantage of where we can maximise our commercial revenue, and but we are probably getting reasonably close to our limits at the moment in terms of where we are. You know, hopefully with some investment into our venues, which is also important, we actually can probably lift the revenue that we get from our individual events. You know, try and lift that base that we've got. So that's one of the targets that we'll be setting to do. And then I suppose the other piece from that is try and how we can get the organisation to be more efficient in terms of what we do, that will just give us a better gap between our revenue and our expenditure.
Councillor Walker.
Sure, I've got a few questions. The first question goes to your redesign business model. And the question goes to the separation into cost and revenue centres and assets across your portfolio, so that as a councillor and as councillors who effectively act as a board, we have some oversight on the return on investment. Let's take the $40 million into Aotea Centre, the zoo, equally the stadiums and the like. It would also give us some oversight in terms of the performance, so that if the stadiums are down and particular stadiums are down, we've got some oversight. And we also understand what the rationale is around an investment, and whether an investment is a good return on investment or not. At this point in time, as a councillor, I do not have that. I have been asking for it. The information is not communicated on the website or the like, and I've also raised that issue around the art gallery, for example, and particularly around those entities, the art gallery, the zoo, where we're trying to enhance the involvement of the community in terms of membership and the like, and I'm assuming that that
so
will also...
Councillor Walker, I'm going to ask
So
the
I've
answer
got
to the question.
a question around the progress around that, because it's important to me.
Well, Councillor, I think anything that we do from an investment perspective, we put a business case to our board, and we go through various criteria in terms of ROI and those sorts of things, and that's the governance model that we operate to. We look at our venues, and we have each of the businesses that may use them for different purposes. For instance, the art gallery is used by Auckland Conventions, it's used by Auckland Live, and it's also obviously clearly used by the art gallery. So we have different pieces of the model that operate across all our venues. Aotea Centre is the same, used mainly by Conventions and Auckland Live. So I suppose what we are doing to see now where we've got, I guess, consistent things like front of house across the whole organisation, how we can bring those together and use that function to support across the businesses. I understand you're meeting with Simon anyway, just to run through, so we're happy to sort of sit down and give you any greater clarity that you would be looking for.
Just in response, I'm less interested in sitting down and getting clarity. I'm interested in information in black and white. I mean, I understand that you report to your board, but equally we are a board. And for example, $40 million expenditure into Aotea, that's a significant investment on the part of the ratepayers of Auckland. So what return are we getting around that cost and revenue centre? Western Springs, investment in there. What return are we getting? Is it realistic or not? Concerts. It's clear from what you're saying that there's actually a limit on perhaps the number of concerts that we're going to get in Auckland for a whole variety of reasons, and that's been forecast out. So what's the return on investment that we're getting from a particular stadium or a venue? I would suggest that we need that. Otherwise, it's just a bucket that money is being poured into.
Councillor Walker, that is not a question.
Without any oversight.
Councillor Walker, that's a statement and that's fine, but to a degree, I'm sort of almost getting the impression you really have no faith in the RFA board because, you know, we have a CCO that's set up separately there. They have a board that they're accountable to. It's our most business-like CCO that we've got with ups and downs and fluctuations. I suppose, I don't know, I'm questioning.
Well,
what are you questioning? I think
I just refer to
you've had an undertaking. You've had an undertaking from RFA at the previous meeting that there is going to be more identification of the costs where it can be done for each of the business units. Now that was stated quite clearly by Simon at the last time we had this discussion. So I'm not sure what more can be done, but they've also offered to actually try and go through things with you a little bit more as well. So,
through you, Mr. Chair, I'm just referring to the 2016 Statement of Intent, where there was a clear statement around more transparency, effective separation into cost and revenue. And that's all I'm looking for.
Yep, and they've indicated they're going to give you more transparency as far as they can without divulging commercial, not secrets, but just commercial information. So.
Okay, so that was a question. The other question, and I don't need the answer to it now, but particularly as it goes to concerts, it would appear that there are limits to growth there, and quite obviously impacts. It would be useful to have some more information about that going forward, because it begs the question, what is the rationale of investing more into an asset or given assets if there is not going to be a return simply because the market doesn't exist? So that's an issue of concern to me. Again, don't need the answer to that right now. And I guess the last question I've got just goes to the zoo. I note the membership model that you've got there, and I'd suggest that's a good model. Is there a proposal to roll out that model to other business units? For example, the art gallery, the Maritime Museum and the like, which are, if you like, public-private partnerships in a sense.
Well, just in terms of the membership, we already have a membership model at the gallery. We have about 7,000 members of that, so it's a similar model, and we will do a similar thing with the Maritime. So those models do currently exist across the business.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got 3 financial questions, and the first one is a little bit in line with yours. This is likely to be the 3rd year in a row where revenue is unfavourable to budget. So is it really cyclical, or do you really have to look at your budgets again? That's the first question. Do you want to answer that one first, or?
Happy to do so, Councillor. I think it's you will see from the last 3 years that probably our revenue is flatlined during that for that period. We've had sort of little growth across that, even though we've certainly in this current financial year we set a really high target. We will go back and we are forecasting this year that our revenue is not going to grow dramatically over what it is, and I think it goes back to the areas that I've focused on before, that it's where our venues are at. We'll be further challenged this year by the zoo, by the Aotea refurbishment, and just by the loss of the VEC. So, our revenue base is going to be quite hard to sustain where we've got at this point. We are hopeful once they are completed, we'll be able to get additional returns out of those venues once they've been refurbished and upgraded.
Okay, I acknowledge your external revenue has gone up from 48% since 2012, so that's good. My second question is, financial question, is around the zoo, though. Obviously, it's been consistently had trouble with numbers through to weather, but it's a comment in pretty much every quarterly report I've read. So my question is, do your RFA projections on the zoo need to be more realistic, that given that even in a relatively dry year, visitation numbers were well short of targets? So at what point are the budgets adjusted on the zoo?
So for this coming year, we've actually adjusted the numbers down because we think that's where we will be. We're working on, for the next year, 660,000 through the zoo. We are actually also looking at what our pricing model is, just to see whether we should be doing something in terms of having sort of a construction pricing or something like that. So we're doing some modelling on that at the moment, which we may come back and say that we're going to look at changing our pricing. So we're just working that exercise at the moment to determine what the best mix could be around from a pricing perspective. But we have pulled our numbers back, and we think that we can achieve that this year.
Okay. And my last question is around budgets for business cases and the like. So when you're asked politically to do a business case, do you report, can you tell me about the process around that? Do you report back on the estimated cost of that, or do you just pay whatever the bill is? How financially do you budget and plan when a business case is requested from you?
So through you, Chair, it depends on the size of the investment that we're looking at. So if you go, say, a $5 million project, we would do the preliminary works to get through our board, seek funding for preliminary works to understand whether it's a project which can go ahead, that aligns with our strategic direction as well as council's. So if it passes that first test, then we will go to the next stage to get a firm cost in terms of what it will be, and then we'll proceed or not. So we'll take it back to the board again to get firm numbers. But we do operate in in terms of the wider group, where in some ways we're asked to put forward funding requests 2 or 3 years in advance of us doing the work, and it's something which we just will continually iron out. But certainly for larger projects, the expectation is that it is a full business case to the board. The first step being not a feasibility, but just an idea in terms of how aligned it is with our strategic direction, and then get a firm costs. But if it's a lower, because over 80% of our capital program is to do with renewals. Generally, it's around when they need to be done, why they're being done, and whether the investment's required given where, if we're going to change the use of a facility, whether we're continuing to invest in renewals. So we do go through that. But over 80% of our capital spend is renewals, and within that there's probably around 200 projects. Mm-hmm. And only the ones that trigger a certain delegation would go to the board for that, and it's generally new investment that goes up. So
approximately how much per year do you spend on sort of feasibility studies? Do you have any idea? I mean,
no.
Because obviously the feasibility happens before the project, so I'm interested in the financial impact of how much do you spend on something that may not happen. I'm just interested in.
I think if I can respond to that, Councillor, I mean, I think we try and do most of the work ourselves internally. So if we have a big project, and you know clearly that the work we've done recently on stadiums, we went external on, but most of the business cases around, say, the Aotea refurbishment and the zoo, we would do the business case inside the organisation with support from engineering consultants and architects and those sorts of things, but as part of any planning process. So we don't, you know, I think within our within our overall budget in terms of having funds for that type of activity, we've got a pool of about $1.5 million, but we have to pay internal audit fees and a whole lot of other things out of that. So, you know, the pool that's available for feasibility type activity would probably be less than $1 million a year.
Okay, thank you.
And we don't always utilise it, so it just depends on what things are at.
Right, councillors, we're running a quarter of an hour behind. I have councillors Sayers, Cooper, Casey, Newman and Hills. So, Councillor Sayers.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Fairly quick question. First of all, gentlemen, thank you for your presentation. And this may be directed, it might be for you, Kevin, or Simon, I'm not sure which, but I'll just pop the question up. And just picking up that point in the bigger picture there where you're talking about needing to correctly allocate staff costs and around cost of sales, and that you need to go through an exercise to try and get that reflected correctly, so particularly, you know, when it goes out in, I guess, annual reports and things like that. So is that, I'm picking that's something to do with the GL ledger code or something similar to that. So is that a difficult exercise to achieve, or is that something that's fairly easy that can happen? Just want to get a feel for. Through your chair, it's also the accounting rules. Unfortunately, the accounting rules dictate that we do put our staff-related cost of sales into staff costs. In the annual report, we do pull it out. We put a separate note in there just to make it clear that our budget, we don't budget cost of sales staff-related under staff costs, but when we account for it, we do. So we do put a separate note, and it's just a process we do need to tidy up internally. So we do pull it out internally as well. Simon, when you say accounting rules, is that are they national standard rules, or are they our? Oh, they're international rules, and it's a point it's been in the early days relatively a debated topic with our auditors on that as well. Is that all right, Kevin?
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. And just two questions. One is around the 40 million for the AOT. Was part of that the dismantling of the plant that is secured between the not Bledisloe building, the Civic and the AOT? Was there some issues around that?
No, that's actually a separate project.
Separate.
So of the 40 million, about 26 is around weather tightness.
Yep.
And the balance is around refurb.
Good. So that's good to hear, because we own these on behalf of the community, and you're actually making sure they don't leak and they don't deteriorate. The other question was, I guess at amalgamation, when RFA was set up and budget set, and I know you've had reductions in contribution from council over the years, it wasn't envisaged that first you'd have to take over Bruce Mason, then QBE, Q Theatre, now the Maritime, and then also, well, sorry, take responsibility for councillor, thank you, and then now the loss of Viaduct Event Centre. How much do you think that's impacted on, you know, your viability in terms of, you know, they've just come, you know, basically had to prop up other entities or fold them in. How much do you think that's kind of impacted, where you probably had to absorb a lot of those costs?
Well, I mean, clearly we've been able to absorb them into the business, and I think we've been able to actually improve their financial performance. It's clearly added to our corporate costs and that in terms of what we've had to deliver. The other areas of, you know, sort of around our corporate costs that have grown have certainly been around health and safety, certainly around security. You know, compliance has increased quite a lot in terms of what we've had to do. The Viaduct Event Centre, as I mentioned, you know, we will be compensated for that for the loss from America's Cup perspective, but it takes away the opportunity to sort of grow that revenue further unless we've got venues. And one of the things that we certainly lose from the VEC, not having the VEC, is sort of the ability to have sort of 1,000-seat dinners, and that's big revenue.
So you've not been, it's not something that's been, you've been basically expected to just suck that up. It hasn't been, you haven't had money to go with that each time, is what I'm saying. Yeah, every time you've had to do that.
I guess what we've tried to do is absorb each of those venues in the most efficient way to deliver the best outcome for the city that we can.
Thank
And
you.
of course, each of those venues has also unfortunately been where they've needed a fair bit of maintenance and upgrade to be able to deliver what they do.
Hence the large capital budget. Thank you.
Councillor Casey.
Oh, thank you. I've got one comment and two questions. The comment is a really good news story, and that is that the Fukuoka Garden recently won a national award at the Sister City award night. It got the best overall project and the best local government project. So I just thought I would share that with you.
Yes.
My second question relates to naming, and you mentioned briefly something about the renaming or naming rights for Mount Smart. What assurance can I have as a councillor that I won't see Sky City Stadium, Mount Smart in the future? By that I mean, what are your ethical considerations when you're considering the naming rights of any of our facilities?
Well, clearly we are working through that exercise at the moment, but we do have, I guess, we would have some ethical views in terms of what would be appropriate for that, and we're working through that at the moment.
And you take the council's ethical views into consideration too, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Yep,
Yes.
good. I'm disappointed that you don't have a board member present, and I see that Lester's here from Auckland Transport and we had Margaret from Watercare, because my next question relates to the elephant in the room, and no disrespect to the zoo, it's not a physical one, and that is the ongoing drama with regard to the secret report that was commissioned by the Mayor from RFA, which resulted in a budget blowout for that year, which was, you know, answered by Simon as to where the money came from. But nonetheless, $935,000, you have a section in your report about risk, and you haven't identified any risk in this quarter from the last quarter. Might I suggest that for the next quarter and for your quarterly report, that reputational risk goes from wherever it is in your list of 100 right up to the top, because what's happened recently has caused a rift between the Mayor and his, I can only speak for some councillors, and I would like to address that issue with your board members, and they're not here.
Not, so the question is,
Where are they, basically?
Well, so if I can comment on that, the advice I'd got today was the board members were not required, so so Don was available, but we indicated that he didn't need to be here, so I can't do any more than that.
So through the chair, who gave that instruction to the board members
because this
of
is the
RFA?
third quarter, we made the offer to those that to think about whether they wanted to. Watercare, Maureen decided she wanted to come, and Lester's decided to come as well. So, what can we say? Margaret, I should say, not Maureen.
So I didn't hear the answer. My question was, who issued the instruction to RFA that they were not necessary?
Through me and the finance team, we just said it was a third quarter report. It wasn't necessary if you didn't think it was appropriate, and therefore it was left for every board to decide, or every CCO to decide whether to have their chair come or not.
So despite the fact that RFA was singled out in the officer's report as one that we should be asking questions of. Thank you, sir.
Right, Councillor Newman.
Hello. How close are we to requiring a conversation between the Board of Management of RFA and the Council around the need to revise the revenue projections that you have to work to? Because it seems to me you're just being set up to fail at the moment. This is not doable. I think that your operations, you're working in a market that's pretty well saturated, and I think that unless the shareholders take some responsibility for the SOI, you're going to continue to have to operate to completely unrealistic KPIs. That's the first question. So could you respond to that?
I think, Councillor, the work that we've been doing with the council team around the LTP and where that currently is addresses some of the issues that you're talking about, so that we've actually we've addressed some of those longer term issues. I mean, clearly we are still going to be operating in a competitive market, and we're going to be entering each year with only a certain percentage of our revenue locked in. But again, we have a level of confidence that with the right level of base funding from the council, we've got the ability to generate a certain amount of commercial revenue on a yearly basis. So, but it will be volatile, and we have, as I said, we have a level of confidence about doing that. But we may find that the market position on concerts changes, the market position on live theatre changes. But again, we're making sure that if we can continue to invest in our venues, that we give the city the best opportunity to get those events here that will deliver that commercial revenue.
Are you getting enough working capital from the council to deliver on your program of asset? I have some sympathy for what Wayne Walker has said previously around the rationale for investing in assets when the return might not necessarily be there, but I also have a concern as to whether the shareholders are mandating the level of capital required for you to be able to do the job necessary. I mean, it's a conversation I know you have with staff in the preparation of the advice to inform the LTP, but we're going to have to go through the annual plan amount, and I just don't know, frankly, given what I'm seeing in your numbers, whether we're actually on the right track.
Of course, we would always like more, and from an asset perspective, we work through our asset management plans, and we're working pretty closely to those. But we also recognise sort of the constrained position the council's in at the moment. So I guess we're trying to make the best use of both the capital that we get and the operating funding that we utilise, and providing we get through what's in the LTP, we've got a level of confidence we can continue to grow as we are. But as I said, if you were to say to me that there's a lot more capital available, we could probably find ways to use it, but we do accept the current position we're in.
And Councillor Newman, that's a good point, but it seems to be a New Zealand Inc. problem that we possibly do things a little bit on the nickel and dime side of things and don't really...
Well, it's a good argument to not go and chuck a whole lot of money into a vastly expensive new stadium.
Councillor Hills and then Councillor Philippone.
No, it was just a quick question. So I'm glad you're looking at changing the zoo figures, because it has been an issue, and with 40% more rainfall in summer, that's an issue. The other thing is, and I do have concerns about how we get the events right, or how we just tell the story better, because last year the problem was you had 25 more concerts than you'd budgeted for, and 105 more arts and performing arts shows than you'd budgeted for. So then you had an over budget of staff because you had to fund those extra events that you couldn't have predicted. This time you had 3 artists pull out of massive concerts that you budgeted the revenue. You keep telling us that, but we keep beating you up for it. How do we tell the story better? Because otherwise you just, I don't know. I mean, it's up to us too to accept your explanations, but I think there is a disconnect still in how we get that correctly, because you can't budget for doing more and doing less when it's a year out.
I mean, I think, Councillor, the challenge for us, I think, at the moment is that our budgets are pretty finite in terms of where they are and just how we maximise those. I mean, a good example is around the Ed Sheeran concerts. Clearly we did well from a capacity perspective around those. We anticipated that there'd be a spend per head of about $17 or $18. It came in at $10 a head. And that you get, and that has a significant impact on our revenue through the door. So it's each of those, I suppose, events that we have that we just then have to work through. We anticipate a certain amount of revenue and outcome from it. When we don't get it, we then work through what else we can do to try and address that revenue, while at the same time making sure that we do things like Christmas in the Square and those sorts of activities that are important for the community. It is an ongoing balancing act that we work our way through on a yearly basis.
And the overall revenue that the percentage of revenue not from rates is still at 70? In the
70%, yes.
And it's going to be 70% for next year too?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I look at it, we were just discussing it this morning, I look at it slightly different, that we have total revenue across the business of about 90 million, which is sort of the commercial revenue and the revenue we get from council. And we look at that revenue pool on an annual basis of what we can do.
Cool. Thanks.
Councillor
Thank you, Chair. And just three quick questions. Daniel's asked, one of them I wanted to ask, and so it's around the parent company, Daniel, and the funds, or insufficient possibly, that's going to RFA. So look, my question is, the first one is on business cases. Now, there was a question asked around business cases. So where would you normally get requests to do business cases? Would it normally come from your board, the governing body, the mayor? So where would that come from normally?
The request for business card, well, something we would do, but it's a requirement for the board. And that in terms of, as Simon touched on it, on the level of investment. I mean, a lot of our capital projects are quite small, and they are renewals. But significant project things like the AT refurbishment, the zoo, a business case to the board.
Okay. Question, and you said, Chris, that I think the funds from Auckland Council over the last 3 years, there was a comment you made that it's been, has that been stagnant for the last 3 years, you were saying?
It's actually...
If not, how long has it been stagnant?
In relative terms, it has decreased over time, just in terms of... decreased over time. We do get one-off funding for specific items, like the gallery. We received an additional $1 million about 4 or 5 years ago, but that's gone down to zero. So yes, it does fluctuate, but the core funding has largely decreased relative to inflation.
Okay, and last questions for you, Chair. Chris, you made another comment around how you've had to absorb the cost with some of... I was trying to get the context around how much you've absorbed with existing funds that you had. Do you know how much? And I'm trying to get some context around how much you've absorbed as a result of the market, and you've mentioned that. So do you know how much you would have absorbed that normally would have possibly come through from an annual or long-term plan process? That you've absorbed internally.
I'll come back to you on that if that's okay. I mean, we've done some work on that in terms of where we've been, sort of based on what we've taken into the organisation, and also sort of the reductions that we've had across the funding lines as part of that. So
yeah, I just think for all of us just heading into the annual plan. I shouldn't be talking about annual plan. We just finished the long term. Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Chairman, mihi nui ki a koutou I tēnei wā. First thing I want to say, Mr. Chairman, is that is that in all the reporting, I've been actually quite impressed of how Māori outcomes have been presented and formatted, and I don't know if I've been asleep for 7 years or what, but I've really got grasp of the reportage and the way it's been delivered, so I just wanted to compliment everybody on that, and I'd like to see that continue, so thank you very much. Just a question around the Māori engagement strategy. There was a proposal that it would be reviewed within this year. Has that been done yet?
I can answer that. We're doing it in 2 stages. The first draft will go to our board this month. The second stage will be the following month. So we'll hopefully have that completed by July this year. And that expands on our current Māori engagement plan.
Okay, thank you. And just in terms of talking about naming Mount Smart, I assume the owners will be involved?
Absolutely, yes.
And cultural identity and its name of Rarotonga may be considered. I just thought I'd drop that on the table, Mr. Chairman. And I guess one other thing I want to say, not relevant to this, but there's this term, Auckland's Māori. And I hope that over time, we as a place can get to identify Māori as Māori, not by using a platform of someone else that we might belong to them. So I'm happy to help along the way for a better reference and identity of Māori across the Auckland region, but to be identified as Auckland's Māori, I don't really take to that. So I'll just say that not to RFA, but to you, Mr. Chairman, and across the reportage of Auckland Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris and Simon and Paul. Much appreciated. See you at the fourth quarter report with your chairman at that, which could be about his last reporting, I think.
Should be.
Yes, you'd probably be here for one more, I would think.
Okay. Right, thank you. Lester and team, Auckland Transport. Welcome, Shane.
Morning, Mr. Chair. Morning, Mr. Chairman. Morning, councillors. Thanks very much. Today we've got Shane with us and David Bardsley, who's our Acting Chief Finance Officer. Before we start, we'd just like to take the opportunity to, on behalf of the Auckland Transport Board and management and staff, to acknowledge the sad passing of Councillor Dick Quacks.
You're on.
I think that the fact that he was constantly re-elected just shows the high regard in which he was held. I sort of first came to know him. I'm a fan of athletics, and even though I didn't live in New Zealand at the time, I was a strong follower of Quacks, Dixon and Walker in those days. So it's very sad to see him pass, and a real gentleman. This morning, along with the Mayor and the Minister of Transport, Phil Twyford, and the Deputy Mayor, Bill Cashmore, we were privileged to open the new Pukekohe bus interchange. This is a multimodal transport interchange. Fantastic facility if you ever get the chance to go out and have a look at it. Another tangible example of how Auckland is starting to benefit from the investment in public transport. It seems that we frequently at events where we are opening, commissioning, turning a sod or something of that type. And I think the decade that we've got ahead of us is going to be very exciting from a transport perspective. There has never, at least in recent time, been such alignment between the Council, the Government and the Auckland Transport Board, which is pretty phenomenal and really important if we're going to get anything done. The agreement around ATAP is very important, and shortly our board will sign off the Regional Land Transport Plan, also a very exciting platform of development. Before Shane begins his presentation, I just wanted to touch on the incredibly important issue of road safety. As you'll be aware, that our board was unconvinced and no longer confident that the plans in place were going to deliver. And we undertook a board-led independent expert review, the results of which are very concerning. And I just want to reassure councillors that this is at the top of our agenda. We are working closely with ministers and the Mayor. This will require interagency cooperation because a significant number of the elements of road safety are not within our control. I'm guessing that some of the measures that we will be advocating very strongly for will not be universally popular, but no longer can convenience trump safety on the roads in Auckland. So we will be looking towards a number of measures and are working through right at the moment a speed management plan. But as I said, we're having to work closely with all the agencies to ensure that we actually get this across the line. But I'd say just before I hand over to Shane, I think Auckland Transport is also undergoing an organisational transformation led by Shane. It has always, and we have had difficulties with this. It's been a fairly siloed organisation, and that is shifting quite dramatically with the new structure. And very soon we will have roles such as somebody heading end-to-end journeys, digital transformation, safety, customer experience. So we are heading in the direction that we've been wanting to, but we did need to be focused on the introduction of those major projects that we were working on. So we are feeling very positive, and we see the years ahead as being really important in recalibrating the transport system in Auckland. Thank you.
Thank you, Lester, and through you, Mr. Chair.
Welcome,
Before we take any questions on the report, I just thought I'd take you through a few slides, some of the highlights from the first quarter of the 2018 calendar year. So in terms of that, the public transport patronage continues to grow and reflected just under 92 million boardings for the year to March, which is 5.5% growth in patronage, which is by most other cities in the world exceptional. Satisfaction, customer satisfaction with public transport services was up to 91% overall, and it's particularly rewarding to see that the bus customers, the satisfaction with bus services had a 4% improvement. And that reflects the changes to the new network which are being implemented. The next part of the bus network which will have the new network implemented is Central, which happens on July the 8th. Pleasingly also, road productivity and travel times on all key freight routes either met or exceeded targets. And lastly, our key projects are on track with a significant milestone achieved for the Eastern Busway or Amity, with resource consent approved from Panmure to Pakuranga. Some of you may have seen in the report that our capital spend for 2017-18 is behind what we projected. David can talk to you a little bit more about that, but one of the reasons for that is with respect to the light rail project. Obviously we've seen where that's heading, where it will be delivered, where it will be funded, and so there's 30 million of capital that is not being asked for from council. So it's not that we're not progressing projects, it is about obviously optimising ratepayer money. The quarter was also highlighted by storms and weather events that are described in 1 in 100 years, except they tend to be happening a little more frequently than 1 in 100 years. And that creates, as you will all be aware, it's not just in terms of transport, but it creates a significant effort and disruption for us. Again, in terms of our capital and renewal spend, the clean-up from these events meant that some of the renewals work that we would typically have done in the first quarter of this year has been deferred to the second quarter, so you will see some catch-up in terms of capital. So obviously that's a significant, there were significant events in the first quarter of this year. March Madness, busy time of year in terms of a whole lot of people and new customers getting on the public transport network. We had 1.9 million boardings more in March than what we would have in February. It's quite incredible, the change in terms of numbers of people month to month and how we have to deal with that. So the team have that well wrapped up now in terms of providing additional capacity and dealing with that. I think I explained at the last quarterly Finance Performance Committee, we are now actually getting more people using public transport into the central city than single occupant car users. That is quite a shift and a watershed for Auckland, and shows us that the plan that was signed off in ATAP and is in our draft RLTP is a good one. We just need more of it, and we need to deliver on what you signed off courageously last week in terms of the regional fuel tax. Special events, the biggest quarter of the year is January to March. There is a lot of them. The team is busy, and for a city that historically, or when I left the city in 2004, PT didn't make up much. In terms of how people got to special events, it's amazing how the city's changed and how people use PT now to get to special events. The team and event organisers, and working collaboratively with some of the other CCOs, ATEED and RFA in particular, we now have really good processes and support networks in place to deal with that. The train, you may not remember, but we had some industrial action in March, or between March and April, which is around the project where we're looking at reallocating resource from just being on trains across the broader PT network. That did have some customer impact in terms of the services they received, particularly at peak. But we were aware of it and did deal with it in terms of communications with the community and with customers, so that we mitigated that impact and gave them control wherever possible on how they might travel. Just want to deal with customer services improvements, and particularly our contact centre and customer services centres. Some of you have kindly donated your time and being involved in what we would call sprints through our Customer Central agile approach to how can we quickly understand where we're not delivering, where we can be in terms of customer feedback. We've made really good progress in terms of that sprint, seeing some real opportunities of how we can improve. We're still working through the recommendations at this point in time, but we hope to close the loop with particularly the councillors who have been involved, and some of the local boards as well, in terms of that implementation. We're not waiting for it to be completed. There are some, as you'll see on the next slide, some changes we're already making about having dedicated customer services teams allocated to either local board concerns or legoimas or other areas, and that's really focused on improving the experience both that elected members have, but also the broader community has in terms of feedback or concerns that they have with us. On the next slide, you'll just see some of the examples that we're looking to implement in terms of reporting. So looking at how can we give councillors and local boards better information about what are the concerns for some of the communities, and they do vary by communities. So we're trying to give you, we'll be looking to give you better information about what are the concerns, what are the root causes of the issues, what's our response times, so that you're actually aware of how we are performing in terms of dealing with communities. Lastly, before I finish up in terms of the slides and take any questions, we are focused on building an organisation culture which is both diverse, reflects the communities we serve, and inclusive. The teams involved, of which the Chief Stakeholder Officer, Wally, is one of the leaders of the Diversity and Inclusion Leadership Team, have established committees and support networks for Māori, Pacifica, women, and for the rainbow community, and we are progressing with rainbow tick accreditation. And lastly, you will have heard about the Southern Initiative and the work we've done with the Southern Initiative around the Manukau bus interchange. We have, as of February this year, taken on our first group of cohorts, our first cohort of graduates, cadets, and other younger members of the community, which is both about growing a pool of people who can take positions within Auckland Transport, but also getting some of our team to understand some of the thinking and dynamic thinking that younger people can bring to our organisation. We are looking at a second group at the moment for 2018, and we are very much targeting, as part of that, a bigger proportion of Pacifica and young Māori. So that's the presentation, so happy to take any questions. Either David and I have the rest of the team here as well.
Thank you, Shane. Councillor Newman.
Yeah, look, thank you. Hi, Shane. I want to, and Mr. Chair, I want to acknowledge Auckland Transport has been trying very hard to address my advocacy and my riding the organisation hard in relation to maintenance strategies around the STE targets for rural and urban roads. And I think this goes to the heart of the questions about road safety. But whilst the smooth travel expenditure targets, which reflect the maintenance standards, have been reflected, to ensure you can deliver a network maintenance program moving forward, there is a likelihood that weather events are going to challenge your ability to achieve the ceiling for the network. So my question is, or two questions. Firstly, if Auckland Transport's exposed because of weather events compromising your ability to achieve these quarterly ceiling targets, what's your response to ensure that you actually have the internal capacity to deliver on a maintenance and ceiling program so that you're hitting that target all the time, understanding that you've got to try and achieve network maintenance across a very wide network of 7,000 roads or therearabouts?
Through you, Mr Chair. Councillor, there's a number of, as you can imagine, with ATAP and the alignment around between central government and local government, we are having to revisit a number of areas in terms of delivery, of which the area you've mentioned is one of them. Part of that will also be about not just the capacity and capability of Auckland Transport, but also of industry to be able to deliver in terms of the ramp up in a number of those activities. So the next 2 or 3 months we are focused on looking at ways we can do things differently to be able to meet the aspirations of the governing body and stakeholders and community. So it's not a specific answer for you right now, but it is a key concern, is something that it keeps me awake at night.
So I'll come back to you on that one, as you can imagine. But does the New Zealand Transport Agency accept the same issue with respect to its networks? It actually needs to do much better in terms of its maintenance program itself. Otherwise, it puts the pressure back on your local roads.
It's probably something that would need to come back to you on, Councillor.
Okay,
I think, could I just say, I think that one of the issues is, as there is more and more to do, we need to find a way of totally decoupling maintenance from new developments.
Yes.
Because there is the capacity for cannibalisation. The other thing is we also need to get the contractors to up the quality, because there's not enough time to do everything once. There's certainly no time to do everything 2 or 3 times. So that's a major factor as well. But there is going to be an ongoing sustained pressure on organisations like us and NZTA and the like to deliver, because the weather is now a much more highly weighted factor.
One final quick question, if I may, Chair. With $10 million of new local transport projects dropped in through the long-term plan, that means a lot more projects to deliver locally. Does Auckland Transport have the people to do that?
Similar response to the first question. It does mean a significant ramp up, whether you talk about road safety, local board initiatives, network optimisation. It is a significant ramp up in a number of projects, and it is something that we're clearly concerned about and clearly working on in terms of having an organisation which is fit for purpose and fit for to deliver.
And it's not a linear increase from where we are. It has to be something totally different. Okay. I would say about the local board projects, just from my experience over the years, these are the projects that are the most appreciated.
Yeah.
And so we kind of love doing those, because you really get a sense when you go to those just how appreciated they actually are. And the more the communities are involved, the better. And increasingly, and I've said this before, more community involvement as the leader and AT as the follower in terms of helping deliver, get a much better project.
Okay, I'll come to you offline. Thank you.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, and Mr. Chair, I hope my questions are actually put in performance, not necessarily financial, but my first one is around the footpaths. That's one of the things that we're not on target with. It's page 19, measure 7. So what plans do you have to improve the satisfaction rating here? Is there insufficient renewals funding being spent on footpaths as opposed to other areas? I suppose the reason I'm asking that is that, you know, the sort of things I hear is, look, you're redoing footpaths and we think they're fine, and yet, you know, where footpaths are obviously not fine, they don't seem to be done. Is your renewal of footpaths annual, or is it actually really based on, you know, because we've changed our parks maintenance, you know, not annual, but, you know, we used to say that every footpaths need to be redone every 5 years or every whatever. Is it actually still done on, do you look first and then decide to do it, or is it done on a, we haven't done this for X years, so we need to do it now?
It's a mixture of both.
Right. Yep. And would you potentially look at, if it doesn't really need to be done, leave it alone for a little bit longer and...
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Oh,
I think
good.
it's
really good
interesting you raise it, because we were just talking about this the other day. We find that one a little perplexing, the low satisfaction. You compare footpath quality in New Zealand to lots of other jurisdictions, it's pretty good. So we're really scratching our heads about that one, and we're going to think about, maybe it's the way we ask the questions. I think we need to do more work around that, because if there is a perceived low satisfaction, it might drive a level of increased investment that's actually not required.
Yes, with respect, my suggestion to you is also around communication, because sometimes people, you know, I take, for example, Keeper Road. People said, well, there was nothing wrong with it. Why did you redo it, you know? So maybe a little bit more communication, maybe through the local boards and whatever around that. And I agree that the local board funding, the increase in that's going to be great locally. But I was very pleased, Shane, to hear that you incorporating the councillor as well, because quite often the projects, there's a difference between in local board land, when they get their funding, they can do whatever they like, that's fine. But actually a lot of the projects that Auckland Transport done are from a regional pot. And the satisfaction that the councillor might feel is to their communication around how that's working potentially is would be interesting to see the results of that as well. And just a little bit specific, my final question is on page 9, you talk about the GI to Tamaki shared path. My understanding is that actually is behind schedule, section 3. It says its completion expected July 2018. That was what was expected, but actually it's about 6 months. I think Wally will back me up on this. It's about 6 months behind. And there has been a few hassles around that. So I'll talk to you offline, but when projects are NZTA and AT co-funded, I just feel that there needs to be a little bit more communication around that. This one is not a good example, but Wally's over it, and I just thought I'd mention it today, seeing you're here, Shane, and you too, Lester. But I suppose the key question for me is I'm really keen to get walking and cycling promoted, so it's more, you know, it's more efficient for a whole network. So, you know, to have projects go behind budget's never good on that. Right, thanks.
Just as a follow-up question, some of us might observe that in the kind of the better suburbs, footpaths look great, ceiling looks great, and you compare that to South Auckland, parts of West Auckland, not so good. Yet you see work that appears to be being renewals, and you go, wait a minute, why is this being done when it doesn't appear to be necessary? And yet we've got areas of the city that just hanging out for it and don't seem to get prioritised. Can you just explain, because Lester, you mentioned you do delay things, but where does this prioritising really take place?
We'll ask Cynthia to answer that question.
Councillor, I've been looking at it a little more closely, because I hear a lot of this all the time, that we've got 7,500 kilometres of roads, 7,400 kilometres of footpaths, and we're just regurgitating. The term is the easy ones. There is a process, and there's and we've just had the asset management business improvement review done, but there is evidence that that's not actually happening, that because there is so many kilometres of roads and footpaths, that it actually is in a plan, and the RAMS product does prioritise. I haven't looked any deeper than that at the moment, and I will, but I hear it every time I'm out with local boards, every time I'm with councillors, that the easy jobs are getting done all the time. We'll look at it more closely, but from what I've seen on the face value from the Business Improvement Review, reading the Asset Management Plan and looking at the RAMS product, which is the tool that prioritises, it doesn't seem that it's like that, and I don't know why there's evidence. You know, I don't know why that we keep getting that feedback, so I have to just keep watching and do a bit more out and about and have a look at footpaths. But we're hearing that all the time, so we're trying to dig on it. I don't know what the answers are yet.
You're on to it, that's good.
I think a good indicator is a councillor who represents possibly our most affluent of suburbs is also nodding and saying, yes, I noticed that in my ward, that does this need to be done yet? So I think we're getting notification there. That
we'll take a deeper look at that. This business improvement review that's referred to, not only did we do safety, but there was a board-led independent expert review on our asset and facilities management as well, and that's a reference that's being made there.
Okay. Right, now we have a roll call here. Councillor Darby, Watson Hills, Cashmore, Casey, Walker, Holst and Cooper.
Don't worry, I'll ask my questions as they leave
Councillor
the room.
Darby.
Thanks, and thanks again, team. Outstanding numbers for March, and March has also had one down day because it was a Good Friday, so they make those numbers even look better, if that was a business day. We've got a workshop coming up once we've got a few things out of the way on our side, a planning committee workshop looking at the Howard Safety Report, which is great. I want to commend the board for commissioning that report. I'm not going to ask you what that report costs, because I know ignoring it is going to cost us, as identified in the report, $1.2 billion in health and well-being implications on an annual basis. And I think we need to recognise that when we talk about the cost of congestion, that there's actually another phenomenal cost to Aucklanders every year. And we need to bring those up and acknowledge them parallel to each other, not just highlight the cost of congestion. I guess my question is really the imperative around the deaths and serious injuries numbers and addressing those, which the board is now determined to track pretty hard. I do see sometimes proposals go to elected bodies, local boards, there might be even councillors, where a response to a death or a serious injury or other injury is recommended, and that doesn't get followed through on because there's political resistance. So how is the board and the management going to deal with bringing some urgency and freeing up that process so that you can actually respond to that death and serious injury in a very timely way?
Well, just a total shift in mindset from our organisation, that we have made this our #1 priority. In a sense, we cannot continue to just prioritise travel speed and journey time. So we are going to have to take this on. It's going to be difficult, and we're going to need support. And where we don't get support, we will still continue. Because this has been, I guess, it has not been prioritised right across the country in the way that it should be, and I think that report, we asked for a hard-hitting report. There was absolute protection of the author by myself, so there was no way that anyone could hold the pen, anyone else. And we've got the report, we have to deal with it, and it's going to have to be very difficult. It's going to be difficult, and we're going to have to be very tough. And I'm quite happy to debate with anybody on any political or any other basis that is more important than saving somebody's life.
Yeah.
And, you know, we've just changed. So we are a different animal to deal with completely on this. We will be very resolute, very tough, and we're not going to be pushed around on this because convenience, speed, all of these things, they do not trump safety. It's not going to be easy.
It is great to hear, Lester and Shane. I think I read somewhere that you were taking all of the recommendations.
All of them.
All of them, no questions,
yes,
and responding to them.
Yes, we're going to implement all 45 recommendations.
That's
yes.
great.
It's remarkable.
That's
Thank you.
fantastic. Well done.
Can I add something to that as well? Because I think it's a good point about that social cost. And there was a funding application for a intervention, a safety intervention today. And as part of that, it was changing a road. It's recognised as a dangerous road. And in that application, it picked up the social cost as well. So it reflected the past history, the deaths, injuries, etc., over a period of time, and had a social cost element of that. So it wasn't purely about productivity, but we probably don't bring that out as much, but it is part of that consideration.
Right.
And we are calling on and expecting for us to receive the backing that we need from other agencies in order to sort this problem out.
Thank you.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know, I think it was Shane that mentioned something about dynamic thinking or looking to perhaps respond in a timely fashion to the kind of public expectation that will be once they start paying, you know, the 11.5 cents a litre, that things are getting delivered on the ground. I think of the example of the Whangaproa dynamic laning, where they just went to the AM over the last month, which has been even more successful than the PM. I mean, just phenomenal. So it had challenges, but the budget for that, the speed with which it was delivered, the incredibly impressive effects, I'm hoping that kind of thinking can be then transferred to other areas. And I look, for instance, at the ferries, where again, the numbers are going up, and quite spectacularly so in specific locations. I just wonder, this is my question then, what is the ability to provide that same kind of dynamic thinking to a public transport option like this, especially given the fact that America's Cup is coming, that has a whole seaborne component to it. Do we have that same possibility in that aspect of a public transport offering?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The answer to that is yes, and we have a Mark Lambert, who's the Transport Services Officer, who's with me today, and Cynthia, are leading a piece of work which is development of an on-demand roadmap for the next 3 years that has the potential, both from a customer experience and a value for money perspective, to deliver a really different experience in terms of public transport, optimising what we do today and delivering a range of services which are tailored to the diverse needs that Auckland has. So yes, there are opportunities to do that.
And we're very conscious that not everyone has the patience to wait for the CRL or the light rail to be delivered. They will be, but we have to have a number of initiatives. And optimisation, like in Whangaproa, there's opportunities for that, and we have to deliver those, and regularly, and all over. Because if you're living in Franklin, Pukekohe today, it's a great day. But if you're not living there, you don't see that, you're not going to use that. So we have to make sure that we're everywhere. Because realistically, people don't appreciate what they're not going to see or use.
Councillor Hills.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, first of all, just congratulations on all the positive stats. As per usual, we're just seeing them jump up considerably. I do have a few kind of examples and questions just on things like the road sealing. I know it's weather, but what would help my social media accounts and my phone calls and the time we probably waste contacting you guys is just a few corflute signs up when it's clear what the issue is. So people go, why has this been taking so long on a sunny day? Because they forget that the last 2 days had rained and filled the whole area with potholes. Just a few signs saying rain has delayed this, or whatever. Or when we often we rehab a whole road but leave it which looks like chip seal for about 4 weeks to cure. Everyone thinks the job is finished. It just needs a sign saying, coming back in a month to finish the job. It's just so clear, because for us, when we go, it's finished in June, that's fine. But for someone who has to drive through that road 3 or 4 times a day, it seems like it's been going forever.
No, very good point.
And it wastes a lot of your money and time by following it up, getting back to us 1,000 times. If it was just clear, 98% of people would drive past that sign or bus past that sign and go, oh, got it, easy. It's not
kind of status report signage, yep.
Yeah, so
we'll do that.
Even to me, sometimes I go, is this finished? Surely it's not finished, and then it's obvious that it's not. The other thing on end-to-end trips, I'm not 100% clear with the new network, the replacement, so I'd just like a bit more information on that and how it will be given back to the community. That's not for here. While we're celebrating all the big good things, I think it is just those little things again. Say like in the weekend, I spent half my Sunday calling in blocked drains. But if Auckland Transport had just put up, call this number and log it, and we'll prioritise, this stuff happens with heavy rain, it fills the gutters with, it wasn't because you hadn't done the job, because I know there'd been street cleaners there within the last 2 weeks, so it had been done. But when you get heavy rain for 6 hours, it's going to wash debris into, if you just had all your social media accounts putting a quick reminder, log, and we'll, because it got done. Within 2 hours of some of the calls, there was contractors on a Sunday. I talked to one of them who on his day off was doing the job. It was great, but people just don't understand, don't know, and they think nothing's been done ever. But it's just those clear, kind of really easy examples of what's happening. And the other thing, I think we've set expectations super high, and I want to thank you. And I want to call out Cynthia as well for being so available to us the last few months on issues and being really blunt with us on especially for someone. Especially for someone who doesn't...
Realistic is the word you're looking for.
Well, realistic, but...
Blunt.
No, she's Australian.
She's an Aussie, she's allowed to be blunt.
Not blunt in a bad way, just like, no, this is what we're doing. For someone who hasn't lived here very long to have the knowledge of across Auckland already, I just found it extremely helpful. But we've set expectations high, and I think you guys need to continue to be blunt with us so we can be blunt with the public on when things are going to happen, when they're not going to happen, why they're delayed, and when people see progress. Because I think there's a lot of people out there who are, it was 50-50 on lots of things, but if we don't see results or see change or have an understanding of what's going on, people are going to turn their backs on you and turn their backs on us. So we just need to make sure that we've, put all the numbers out there. It's transformational, but we need to show the stories across the city constantly and keep reminding people, because we know the details, but the average person has no idea. So I think, just those things. I think there's heaps of good stories to tell, but I just don't think we're often telling the stories enough and as often and as clear, which just delays people's fears.
Thank you, Councillor Hills. Councillor Cashmore.
Oh, thank you. Just 2 quick questions, guys, and that's about and lady, how are you going to ramp up the capacity of the industry to be able to fulfil the expectations of ATAP plus maintenance plus renewals? That's the first question. Second question is around heavy traffic. The roads where the heavy traffic routes are, whether that be quarries or landfills,
or ports.
Or ports, but particularly those first 2, are being destroyed. Whether it's the quality of the seal or a history of poor quality stuff going, but something needs to be done because the repair works, the reseals will be in and they're destroyed within months. So what work's been done on that?
The clean fill.
Yeah.
So, through you, Mr. Chair, I'll take the first question. In relation to industry, we are acutely aware at the moment, as is NZTA, that industry is almost in a state of hiatus, waiting to see what's going to evolve in terms of the plans. We are, I guess, getting close to having the draft RLTP signed off and finalised. Once we have that, we will start to engage both with the professional services and contracting industry, both in terms of giving them clarity about what the program is going forward, but I guess addressing a number of the concerns or questions you've had around capacity, also asking them how they can help us deliver the program, because it is a significant ramp up, and doing things as we've always done them may not actually get us there in terms of the community seeing the benefits of their regional fuel tax and things like that. So we will commence engagement in the very, very near future with industry about that.
Take the second question. Councillor, through the chair, we're well aware of the impact that the urbanisation is having on industry and the roads. We have recently gone through the quarry out in your area, Clevedon, and we asked for a consenting imposition that made the company pay for the road upgrades, and community are up in arms about it. They're talking about putting up to 1,200 extra trucks on the road every day, but that does grow over a 10-year period. It's not immediately. Industry are not happy with that position, and so we're trying to negotiate some sort of sensible solution that appeases the community, maintains the impact on the roads, and works best for everyone. It's just not an easy solution, and we do need to continue to work with industry about putting some responsibility onto them. But they're appealing that situation. It's happening everywhere for us. So we're working hard to try and keep the roads maintained. And community don't want the big trucks, but the urbanisation and that conflict is not going to go away in the next 10 years.
Yep. Cheers for clarification. I don't think, personally, and I don't think the local board is concerned really so much about the quarry truck numbers, as quarries are where they are, landfills are where they are. It's a matter of mitigating the effects that they have on the road quality, and whether we've got to do some better job of a seal mix or the engineering on those roads, but something's paramount now. Because the unitary plan identified those quarry routes, which is a good thing. Then the Commission has removed that identification, which is kind of a sad thing. Yeah. So I just think, I think it'd be fair, few people in the south would agree that there needs to be some sort of middle grade between motorway standard and local road standard for those major quarry routes. 10 million tonnes a year.
Yeah, agreed, Councillor. We've got to work through it. The company that's put in the resource consent don't want to pay for the maintenance. We're trying to hold hard that they do have to pay for the maintenance, but we do want it to be a sensible outcome. We understand it's a commercial position, and the quality of the road is problematic when some of these roads have been regional roads, regional rural roads, and are now turning into
highways.
Highways is probably the right word. And who is responsible? You know, they've not been graded like that before, and there's an enormous cost, and it's some widening, and there's in the area that you're talking about out at Clevedon, there's an issue about the bridge. The bridge is not safe to carry that amount of, and no contractor wants to pay, no company wants to pay for replacement of the bridge. So we need to be a sensible resolution that identifies how much this brings to the city and how much we need quarries for the building of our infrastructure, but community don't like it. Local boards are trying to deliver what the community wants, so it's not an easy answer. We just have to continue to work through it, try to have a sensible resolution where we potentially, and I probably wouldn't say this in other than this room, is share the cost. And that won't be our first position, but I don't think we're going to get up any other way.
I agree.
Shane, as a follow-up to Councillor Cashmore's first question, given there's not many operators out there, how are Auckland Transport and NZTA and / the government intending to ensure there's not price gouging on contracts and basically profiteering by the fact there's only a couple of operators? We know what it's like with apartment buildings now. We're down to 2 basically that have the ability to go up, plus some smaller operators. But it's a big ramp up in our program and the country's program. So how are you and NZTA, and I emphasise the government again, intend to try and keep a cap on things? Maybe Lester wants to answer that.
No. I think it's slightly different answers for whether we're talking about contracting or the operational space or just generally industry capacity. I think they're slightly different answers in each each area. Earlier or late last year, we established, AT established panels for work, Tier 1, Tier 2 panels for contracting work going forward. We haven't, they were established in December. We haven't actually put that much work through those panels to this point. There's a good reason for that, given the finalisation process around the RLTP and things like that. But that gives us a lot of opportunities in terms of that. We've also been able to promote some more local contractors up into those panels, so that will both make it easier for industry in terms of the amount of effort they have to put into the number of procurement activities that they have to do, or reduce the effort for each procurement. But it also gives us a panel of 7 or 8 Tier 1 contractors, for example, that we can go to for each role, for each job, while keeping their costs down in terms of the procurement, things like that. So that's in the contracting sense. We've had reports, maybe we were too effective in some cases under the PTOM model in terms of bus contracting. We did exceptionally well, or Mark and his team did exceptionally well in terms of what they procured for what was spent. So we need just to actually find a balance between the concerns you have and also ensuring industry sustainability is there as well.
I think it's our biggest strategic risk, Chair. And I think one of the problems, you say about government, NZT, ourselves, we all actually are somewhat in competition with each other for these resources. I still think our procurement model, when I mean our, I'm talking the general procurement model, is inadequate. I think that you cannot continue to shed all of the risk. I don't think that's going to work. I think we need a different model, and I think that our procurement is far too prescriptive, and therefore we snuff out innovation.
Yep.
I think we need to be much more coming in from the perspective, this is the problem we have, this is the outcome we're looking for, and I think if we were more encouraging of innovation, then we would find different ways and different costs, and people will ally with different providers. So I think that we have to be trying different ways of doing things.
Thank you. Councillor Casey.
Oh, a couple of comments, a couple of questions. The first is, Ibuki, love the fact that you took your leadership team out on electric bikes. Can you please take the councillors and the mayor out on electric bikes and do exactly the same thing?
No thanks.
Holy smoke. Alfie.
Very happy with that.
Hamstring.
Have you got adequate insurance?
Excellent idea. Excellent idea. The other Buki I want to give you is for your progress in establishing a rainbow network and working towards the rainbow tick. As I said to Waterkey, that's fantastic. 2 questions. Up there you had a slide that said VIP complaints. Who makes them?
You.
I just need to know.
Looking at the figures, it looked like Councillor Darby and Hills.
That's senior councillors.
It is all councillors, ministers, Lester and myself make it onto that list. But it's that group of people.
Right, so just on that, Councillor Desley and I have been whinging for years about acknowledging councillors in the hierarchy of this democracy. And I'd like to say that extreme progress is being made. I'm getting complaints answered really quickly and very fulsome with an action list and a timeline, which is all we've ever wanted. So keep up the good work. That's exactly what we need. You know where the hot spots are. If you're doing construction, there will be complaints. So just kind of keep your radar on us. That's fantastic. My next question, though, the train dispute you briefly mentioned, is it resolved or are we expecting more strikes?
I'm not expecting more strikes for the time being. It is not resolved, but we have entered into a new process, which is a high-performance, high-engagement process with the workforce, with Transdev and ourselves, which is also being overseen by overseen's probably not the right word, but sponsored by the combined trade unions. It is a process that will take through to September and is more collaborative and is intended to work through looking at other alternatives to get this resolved.
Excellent. And just a final question to Lester, and you can not answer it, or probably the chair will intervene, but I'm interested in your risk management section. And what I want to know is, as the chair of the board, you must look at what's currently live at council in terms of reputational risk, and you would see at the moment there's a CCO secret report that's kind of creating headlines. Do you go back to your risk register and relook at your, where your reputational risk sits, and things like no surprises and secrecy and stuff like that, and who you work to?
Yeah, so we're developing quite a sophisticated process, I think, now around strategic risks, and that is one of them. We're trying to move in the other direction, and I think take, for example, the safety report, the board-led safety report. We have made that available to anyone on request. So that is the full report, not a summary, not executive summary. When we released it, we said anybody could get it. So I think we're trying to move in that direction, actually. So I think what you're talking about, not a particular issue for us. We're trying to move in a different direction.
Thank you.
Okay. I mean, I think change in management also allows us to create an organisation that's less rigid, and that we can achieve this. But that's the direction we're going, and I think that safety report, because that is a very tough report, and it takes a few knocks at us as well, and that has been released in full to anybody who wants it. That's the kind of direction that we're going in.
Thank you.
There's a couple of nods there to you, Shane. Right, we have Councillor Walker, Wayne Walker.
I'll just raise a few questions and comments, and I don't need an immediate response. Happy to have that online just to expedite things, Mr Chair. First off, just commendations around the whangaprawa dynamic lane. I won't mention those of my fellow councillor, but the responsiveness on 80's part has been great. So you've modified the times, brought them earlier, later. That's great, works really well. Ferries also endorse those comments and the requirement for a quantum leap, and that goes to the comments that you were making, Lester, about looking at different forms of procurement and the like, issues around risk and so on. And I'd just like to make the observation that I would suggest if we, and Auckland Transport is going to have to look at climate change adaptation, ferries are going to be increasingly important for climate change adaptation, for civil defence. Having them in Auckland and having a fleet of them that are fit for purpose will go a long way in the future. Okay, so as much and all as you're into transport, in my opinion, there's a strong civil defence link that you've got. Just around some of the things that you report on, the metrics, it would be really good to have a measurement around EV plug-in facilities across the region. That would be great. And that might also go at a later point to plug-in facilities for EV electric bikes, and also around a metric for shared bikes and shared cars, given that these are all modes that AT has got an interest in. It would be great to have more of a geographical approach, smaller areas like North Harbour and so on, and I know I've raised that with officers. Thank you very much, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor
I don't
Holst.
need any response right now.
Councillor Holst, to wrap it up, and we're running 3/4 of an hour late, so I'm sure we can pick up with a shorter lunch.
Thank you. I'm sitting here just amazed. I mean, these conversations would never have happened a couple of years ago, and I just want to acknowledge the leadership group that's here, all of you. I'm interested, however, in the challenge that we face now as a council. We've got a whole bunch of targets and performance measures here. We've got Vision Zero, and somewhere I think we need to retool some of the performance targets that we have here. Because the bit that worries me, Mr Chair, in our slightly confused and slightly weird way, we will ask for work to be done that would actually make things go faster, bigger and wider, while expecting less people to die on our roads and be sitting completely out of integrity with Vision Zero. So somewhere in here, I think we need to have that much wider discussion so that you get the political backup that you need when suddenly you are not making a road wider, you're actually slowing things down. You do not need us on the phone or our local boards telling you that you're a bunch of muppets and you need to stop doing it. We need to back you 100% to achieve Vision Zero. So, is there a question in there? It's the when do we get to retool some of the performance measures? And we kind of raised it with Councillor Darby, but him and I guess are on the same pathway on this issue. I'm just pretty keen to nail down some, let's ask you appropriately to do some stuff and then reward you when you do it.
Okay, so that's a good question because that's very much on your mind, and Shane will just update you on our own thinking about doing it. We haven't called it retooling, but it's effectively that.
Thank you, Councillor. One of the part of the transformation program for AT is looking to drive a more performance-driven organisation, and one of the I've actually allocated it to the Chief Strategy Officer, to Cynthia, is to look at what are the appropriate KPI measures for AT moving forward into the future that reflect the strategy and the priorities of AT. We see an opportunity to engage not only with our board but also with councillors on that before it's as part of the development of those KPIs.
Because, as you suggest, the organisation's changing, the context is changing, but we're still measuring the same old things.
Exactly, and that's, I think, been defined as madness.
Yes. We've realised that.
No, more power to you. It's just fantastic, Mr. Chair.
Right, we've had someone else pop up. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. Thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to pick up on your comments, Chair, about community taking ownership of transport projects. Really keen to know what that looks like and how you see it happening.
Well, we've got some good examples. We've had one in up at Matakana around a pedestrian bridge and associated walkway. We've had one in Aoraki with the new sidewalk development, which were very much led by the community, involving also the local board. And sometimes, like in Matakana, was quite wide community involvement, different trusts. And the way I saw that is that ultimately, and Alison Rowe, who's on that local board, said that the thing that they learnt is how to work with agencies in a different way. And we learned to work with them in a different way, but pretty much they led that, we followed. And it's one of the best openings of a new facility that I've been to, because it was just so many people from the community, different trusts that had worked together. So if we can find a way of doing that, that would be our preference in those local board projects. Yeah. But there are others as well. Ferry out Half Moon Bay. There's a number of those. Yep.
Thank you.
Right, thank you, Lester. Thank you, Shane. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Chair. Thank
Cynthia,
you, councillors.
Mark, Wally, the whole team there. Appreciate it. Right.
We'll go out and build things.
Yeah, well done.
Quickly and within budget.
Quickly and within budget. Even if we have to do it ourselves.
Well, why not?
I heard very recently, just on this matter, Chair, I'm building a garage at home which is taking such a long time. And it's a bit like most of these projects. And my wife said to me, you know, what's wrong? What's going on here? I said, why is it called Superman and Spider-Man and not Builder-Man? Because Builder-Man never turns up. So, you know, we've got all these issues.
Right, thank you. Right, councillors, we will be back at 1:30, and it puts us half an hour behind, and we already have the 18 people here, so be aware, please. 1:30.